Okay, welcome everybody that's here. We're going to be starting in just about a minute. So if we could sit tight, we'll get going very soon. All right, we'll give it another 30 seconds and then we will launch right in. Thanks, everybody. Okay. All right, let's get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. My name is Seth Foreman. I'm the president at Socialsuite, and welcome to today's Socialsuite webinar on key sustainability trends to watch in 2024. Today, we have a record-setting audience, so we're really excited, and we have a panel of experts on this important topic. Sustainability is top of mind for companies all over the world between climate change, geopolitics, societal concerns. Simply trying to stay on top of all of these dynamics happening around the world is quite a whirlwind facing executives this year. And it leads to many questions. Where should you prioritize your sustainability programs? How to prepare for not only regulations, but also new requirements, things like assurance. What's the difference between things like greenwashing and green hushing? And generally, the question of sustainability communication is quite a tightrope that many companies are trying to walk right now. Fortunately, today, we have a group of panelists to help us manage through these different sustainability topics. And so we're going to jump in, and I do want to talk about a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to be running our session around content is going to be about 30 minutes. And then thereafter, we'll run about a 15-minute Q&A session. If you have any questions as we go through the content, feel free. On the right side, there is a chat screen, and you could enter your questions in there. And if it's relevant at the exact time, our panelists can jump in and ask questions about it. If not, then we can ask those questions during the Q&A. But make sure you write those questions on there. Final point is that after our session, we will be distributing the recording of today's webinar out to everybody, all the attendees today. So let's jump in and meet our panelists. So firstly, starting on the left is Dr. Tim Siegenbeek van Heukelom. Tim's the Chief Impact Officer of Socialsuite and serves as our domain expert on ESG and sustainability. 2020, he designed the company's ESG starter solution, helping small and mid-cap companies and helping them through urgent sustainability issues relevant to their business. Tim has over a decade of experience in ESG and sustainability, helping companies with reporting and measurement. Then on the far right, we do have Mike Hauer. Mike's the founder and principal consultant at Hauer Impact. Mike is a sustainability communication leader with experience as a journalist and strategist for leading global companies, committed to the advancement of sustainability storytelling. Mike's expertise ranges from ESG reporting to sustainability communication, strategy, and engagement, working at both large and small consultancies, leading in-house communication efforts, and writing as a journalist for GreenBiz, sustainable brands, and more. His blog and podcast also explore sustainability. And in the middle here, we have Nidhi Chadda, founder and CEO of Enzo Advisors. Nidhi is a seasoned growth investor and sustainability advocate with 20 years of experience. She leads a female and minority-led consulting practice, aiding small to mid-cap companies and building top-tier sustainable models. Nidhi champions ESG integration, managing $3 billion across 3 funds. She's an influential figure featured in media outlets like CNBC and Women's Wear Daily. However, she also holds a Harvard MBA and dedicated to shaping sustainable financial strategies. So we have an amazing group today, And I'm now going to hand over the baton to Tim to kick things off with our content. I am going to leave the stage, and I'll be back on for the Q&A. Tim, over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Seth, for that introduction, and welcome, Mike, Nidhi. It's really a pleasure to have you here today. The sustainability trends for 2024. Like I had a look online, and there's a lot of people thinking about this, writing about this. Everyone's got their own views, ideas, even prophecies I saw somewhere. It's really interesting to see that. So today it's really about thinking about at large the sustainability space. What are some of the topics that might be, dropping off going forward, where we see less attention, less focus? What are some of the business as usual topics we're all aware of, like the known knowns that are on the radar, they carry over, we know we need to do the work? Where are things accelerating? And what are the emerging topics and issues that we really, should pay attention to? So before we jump into that, last year, we've seen there's a lot been happening. Some people adopted the year of interoperability, and what that really means is, I would say in short, is getting rid of the alphabet soup of all the acronyms in the voluntary reporting and trying to make more sense of that and make sure that everything works together. There's less frameworks and standards. There's a bit of a challenge in the mainstream media on ESG that we worked our way through, and people saying now, well, after all that, 2024 should really be the year that we do the work. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So that's, I think, what we're looking at here today. At the end of this year, I think we should be able to answer that question. Has 2024 helped us really kind of, put ESG front and center in, corporate reporting? Is it here to stay? I would, likely say yes. Before we jump into some of those trends and reasons there, are there any particular things to both of you that stand out from last year that you feel like, oh, that's an interesting thing that I just, carried over, dropped off, that's accelerating, or an interesting trend to highlight from last year that you want to, quickly flag? I'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this when you asked me to join this webinar, but I always laugh whenever people talk about trying to prophesize and sustainability. Even when I started out as a journalist, that's a very easy and popular article to write every year is, hey, reach out to a bunch of people and ask what they think is going to happen. And, after doing this for about 15 years now, I find that, it's a fun exercise, but we're always wrong. And just knowing that we're going to be wrong going into this conversation, I think is helpful. Or not that we're going to be necessarily wrong, but that it's not going to play out the way we expect ever. And that's actually why I love working in this space, because I have, like, a year ago was a completely different environment than today. So to answer your question, a year ago, I think ESG was the hot word that everybody was talking about. The job market was pretty hot. Everyone was trying to hire for these roles. And then a year later, job market's cooling off a little bit, both depending on the type of sustainability work you're trying to do. ESG is now a very hot potato word that many companies are moving away from. Even words like DEI are starting to get backed away from. And so from a sustainability communication standpoint, I wouldn't say we're backtracking, but I think we're in a very different place than we were a year ago. And then also with all of the emerging regulations that are coming in effect this year that we're going to be talking about, I'm personally pretty excited about where we're coming from, and I think this is what we've been talking about for years, that these regulations are coming, and they are here. As I remember several years back, when we, as a consultant, even trying to sell companies on why they should invest in sustainability, it was always about, like, you might not have to do this now, but you're going to have to someday. So if you get ahead of the ball now, you'll be better off. And not all companies took that advice, but I think now we're in a world where you don't have a choice anymore. You got to do something, and I'm personally pretty excited about where we're headed.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, no, I do think like that's the point. You got to do something, and a lot of people do shy away from ESG, DEI. Sustainability is a nice catch-all term. Nidhi, from your perspective, is there anything that stands out from you from last year?
Sure. Reflecting back on last year, definitely the first couple months were tied up in political backlash. So there was a lot of let's go back to the basics and understand what these acronyms are, why this is relevant, whether it's corporates or investors. And then in the fall, I really noticed a big step up in interest. and understanding decarbonization, energy transition, and recognizing that these trends are here to stay. You know, we have all seen tangible impact from climate change, whether it's wildfires, heat waves, snowstorms, or what have you around the world. And this is real. And folks are recognizing that. We're seeing even naysayers are accepting that. We've seen even insurers back away from Florida, California as examples. And so this is turning into something that is going to have tangible financial impact. It's going to raise a lot of concerns, and folks who have been looking at this as, oh, this is a tail risk, may not be just considering this as a tail risk. I think this is something that is going to start getting factored in when we are looking at it from an investment lens, and the corporations, as they are trying to plan their own strategies and their own expansions, they're going to be thinking about this, and we're starting to see that acceleration. So even despite all the political backlash that we saw, that trend and underlying focus on decarbonization, identifying pathways and emission reduction pathways to really think about both the short and long term was still continuing, irrespective of everything that was happening in the market. And I anticipate that's going to accelerate this year.
Excellent. That's a really good one. Yeah, regardless of what we call it, the impacts are real. And I think that's a really good message there. So today, as we flagged, there's a lot happening in this space. We can't talk about everything, and even this will challenge us for time a little bit to get through this. So I won't spend too much time on this, but these are the topics we'll run through. To start with, we already touched upon that. Last year, there's a big focus on the voluntary reporting. So some of those framework standards and acronyms you heard around the world that we're trying to all bring together to make more sense of that. But then at the same time, we've been hearing for years now that legislation is coming, it will be mandatory. And then suddenly, and this is just a flavor of what's out there and what's to come, there's a lot more. We're going to include other jurisdictions working on this. Like this map could be pretty full on. So I put a few things on here that are either already there or in the works or coming. We're not going to do a deep dive on any of this, but I think the point here is that there is a lot of legislation coming, in particular around climate, to your point, Nidhi, that the climate focus is very strong, the decarbonization, but a lot of these efforts are now going a lot broader and wider. And I think Europe is in particular front runner there. They're doing a lot of that work. So my question would really be, with this happening now globally, what are the implications for companies there? The fact that we see mandatory disclosures, how is that going to influence the way they do business, the way they operate, the way they think, strategize in the year to come? And maybe I'll go back straight to you, Nidhi, and any thoughts or views on that?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of these rules and regulations, big picture, I categorize them in two different avenues. One is that we're going to see increased consolidation across standards. We've already started to see that with the announcement with ISSB. We've already started to see that TCFD is now going to be monitored by international standards. IFRS has announced that one of their two standards, S2, is actually incorporating TCFD. So we're going to start to see that consolidation as companies start reporting on that. That's going to start to have us think about best practices, and it will provide some apples to apples comparison, particularly when it comes to climate data. So very excited about that consolidation that we anticipate to see, of course, starting abroad in Europe, but again, US companies that have European exposure will also be immune to that. The second area that I think is actually even more interesting is rules where we are seeing increased disclosure and requirements of integrating financial implications. In other words, the task force on nature-related financial disclosure is very interesting. TNFD, very similar to TCFD, but basically what's nice about it is that it not only looks at a framework that is very popular in climate, like the TCFD, but it also incorporates risk, opportunities, and goes even further to talk about double materiality. And this has really picked up a lot of steam from both investors and corporations alike. Folks are focusing on their biodiversity policies, broadly speaking. And I think this framework is going to provide a lot of insight, as companies start reporting against this. I believe 320 companies and financial institutions have already signed up for this framework. And I anticipate that as the reporting gets deeper and the integration to the financial impact gets more, that's going to become really the vocabulary for 2024. And that's what we're all very excited about.
Excellent. That's a good pickup. Biodiversity is one of the key words that we've heard last year, like coming up as that emerging topic, and I think that's really going to consolidate this year. Mike, your view on what are the implications of that whole wave of mandatory disclosures?
Yeah, I mean, I would say It's even when you work in this space, that the alphabet soup is just so hard to stay on top of. Like, and I think I work with a lot of companies where they might not have a sustainability person in house, or maybe they have one person doing everything. And I think what I've seen as far as a trend has gone is that there's been so much emphasis on these disclosures now that they're taking away from the actual decarbonization work, and that's a negative trend that I think is not good. Like, even if you look at most of the roles that are being put out there right now, they're disclosure and reporting roles, which is good for people like me who I do a lot of reporting. But I have a lot of friends who, for example, were laid off in the past year from more programmatic roles, and they're having a hard time finding those positions. So I am a little worried that this focus on addressing all these regulations is just going to make it a lot of reporting. And I was at a Green Biz event about, I think, a year or two ago, and someone said, the world will burn, but we'll be putting out reports. And not saying that we shouldn't be doing it, but we need to be doing both. And I will say that sometimes the need to disclose will actually, hopefully, light a fire to actually get the company to do the work. But I would just say, we got to be careful. And I do like this consolidation because it's so overwhelming. Even looking at this map, if you showed this to anybody who does not work in sustainability, they would probably turn it off because it would just be so scary to them. So as a guy whose job is to really help translate this to people who are not experts, I find this a good trend that we're going to consolidate. Simple is better, especially when you want people to do things. But yeah, I think the principle of more regulation is good, and so that's something I'm hoping to see unfolds continuously this year.
And just to add to that point, very similarly to Mike, what you're saying is I'm seeing a lot of folks getting incorporated into the legal function at corporations as well. Compliance is fitting in, auditing, and it all sits in that legal, possibly even the controller role, and it's all reporting in that side. And that's exactly right, to that point. And in a way, it's good that we'll have some kind of comparability and there's going to be accountability. But you're right, there's also bad news there, because where's the strategy component of it? Is that getting pulled away? And that's the beauty of what we do, is that we hope that we can tie all that together in conversations. I feel that in private equity, there is actually hope where we can actually start to see all that really come together, because they really are change agents, being able to invest in companies long-term, think operationally, and they can actually drive strategies and measure financial impact. Apollo is actually tracking the financial impact of, the investments they've made upon exit, especially for some of these ESG initiatives. So hopefully we'll see some activity on the private side that will get corporates excited to see this fits in with the strategy as well. But it is a little bit concerning to see this fall in that legal compliance auditing bucket and just kind of left there.
Yeah, and I'll add to that over the past few years, I've definitely worked with a lot of companies who were, the reason why they were even interested in sustainability is because their private equity owner was quote unquote making them do it. So I think that can also be a good driver.
Yeah. Good points. And we do see with the fact that it becomes compliance. We've had a customer who said that, we're no longer in charge as head of sustainability of the reporting, because it's now with legal and finance, because it's becoming compliance. So that changes dynamics within a company a lot. Like, if the department that should be doing the reporting is no longer in charge. And I think there is that risk, Mike, that you flag around, if it becomes an exercise in compliance and seen as a checkbox, we need to do this. Are we actually still, integrating sustainability in terms of improving, or are we just reporting what we're doing and not trying to improve the situation? So there's a lot happening there. Maybe a little bit, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but one of the flow outs of that is, I think what companies are trying to figure out now, and what is mandated in Europe, is that, yes, there's so much sustainability topics, metrics you could be reporting on, but let's make sure, like we do in financial reporting, we only report what's material. So set that threshold, look at what are the impacts, risks, and opportunities in that sustainability space, and what is really material that we should report publicly on. So that's where the EU starts and says, work that out first. And they go from what they call a double materiality perspective. So they say, we don't want to just understand how the world impacts your business, what the financial impacts are, but also how your business impacts the world. So, do you have a large carbon footprint, and what are the results of that? So that's what they are really strong about, and that should inform your reporting and also your programs going forward. There's a different view globally prior to that, where GRI, one of the oldest standards frameworks, has really been more focused on that impact materiality. So how's your company impacting the world? Whereas the ISSB, that is the consolidation of a lot of those frameworks that we've seen, SASB and TCFD. They're more focused and really kind of designed for investors. Is focused on financial materiality. So that's the focus where we say, well, how is the world impacting your business? They each have their own view. Bring that together, and you get a little bit of what Europe is trying to do. That's really kind of unpacking itself right now. A lot of people are wondering, what should I be doing? I think most companies understand that it is an important exercise to understand what is material. You don't want to report hundreds of pages on everything under the sun, only what's important. What approach do you take? Why? What's required? It's not required from mandated legislation. Then what do your stakeholders want? Your investors want? So there's a lot playing out here. Is there any things that you've seen, and maybe I'll start with you, Mike, around materiality and this approach here that you expect, or any trends that you see in the year to come here? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, my dog decided to go crazy in the backyard barking, so I thought I was on mute, but I was apparently not. Yeah, so the word materiality, it's funny because it sounds terrifying, I think, because it has certain usage in kind of legal circles and in other investor circles that makes a lot of people nervous. But in the context of sustainability, materiality, it really just means important issues. Like you could not even call it materiality assessment. You could say we're doing an assessment of things that are important to our business. And even like the process of conducting materiality assessment, it's still the Wild West. Like it's every consultancy, every company has their own way of approaching it. And it's the amount of rigor really depends on the company. And even the current regulations, like it's not outlining like a checkbox of here's what you have to do to conduct like an actual legit materiality assessment. Like a company could hire me to just do some desktop research on competitors and look at, interview a few people, and we call that materiality assessment. And so I think that's good in the sense that I think companies that are really afraid of the word need to calm down, because hopefully it's not going to deter them from engaging in this work. Because I've actually had conversations where some C-level execs are just terrified of the word materiality assessment, because especially when you add double to it, makes it sound even scarier. And really, it's just stuff that you should already be doing anyway. And I think a lot of companies are doing this kind of informally. Like most companies don't uncover anything like extremely new out of a materiality assessment. It's usually confirming stuff that they already know. Or it's something that maybe it existed somewhere else, but it's codified. And so I think I'm excited to see this become just a regular activity that all companies do on an ongoing basis, because the world is constantly changing. I know there's another word called for dynamic materiality. Although all these words that make it confusing, it really should just be materiality. This should be everything. Like the definition of materiality should be all these things that we're talking about. And I think from a strategy perspective, yeah, like you could spend all day working on every ESG issue under the sun, but there's not enough time and money to do all that. So materiality assessment will help you figure out what to focus on, and also where you can have the most impact, and also where it makes the most business sense to do so. And there was a book I read last year, I cannot remember the name of it, but George Serafeim, who's like one of the leading thinkers on ESG, who I think he's currently at Harvard, he talks a lot about why a lot of companies get disappointed with the return with ESG investments, because they're not actually focusing on material issues like that are financially material as well. So I think companies will also feel a lot better about the ROI of sustainability actions if they're actually focused on the material issues. And then from a communication standpoint, which I'm mostly focused on these days, you don't need to talk about every topic. And I know we're probably going to dive into this a little later, but there's so many social environmental issues happening in the world. There's a lot of pressure to insert your corporate voice on everything, but materiality assessment can really help you figure out like what actually matters to us, what aligns with our corporate mission and our values, and then then you can actually create a narrative that is both authentic and truthful, but also makes sense. And it also takes the pressure off, because you don't have to always talk about everything. So yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good one. We'll pick that up a bit later. It's a good point there. Like, what should you talk about and not? And Nidhi, your views on materiality?
Yeah, and also back to the CSRD framework, I think it's a great framework because it has that balance of E, S, and G. And frankly speaking, last year was really a crisis in corporate governance, in my opinion. We saw a lot of different situations and blowups, regional banks, FTX of the world. And it's a wake-up call that, governance is not just table stakes. We shouldn't assume that. And we have to go back to the basics on the S and the G side. So what I really like about CSRD and the material factors that they focus in on is that beyond climate, they're looking at various different factors such as anti-corruption, looking at ethical issues, looking at child labor, looking at diversity, and that balance is really important. And similar to that, the UN Global Compact, the new questionnaire that was issued last year, is a lot more in depth as well. It forces a company to have the conversations internally. I've done this with clients as well, where we have to think about how do these issues on the S and the G impact a company materially, not just in the own operations of a company, but across the supply chain. And these are the kinds of conversations we need to be having that are going to lend to better decisions from a strategic perspective and have financial impact over long term.
Yeah, good points. I'm going to move us along because there's a lot more to talk about. Well, this is definitely a carryover, but been on the radar of a lot of people, greenwashing, so false or misleading corporate sustainability efforts or claims, mostly I think related to marketing and PR exercises. We've seen this for years now, but I think that everyone's heard of the term. Some people are really getting a bit tired of it, and what we see is that there are definitely now moves as well to fully ban it. So the EU is now proposing to just have a ban on generic environmental claims, like environmentally friendly. It means nothing. Sort of we need to really kind of make sure that we protect our consumers and really kind of work this out. But also the consequences over the last year been definitely more substantial there. So an example where the SEC fined a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank 19 million over misleading ESG disclosures. So I think also on the corporate side is to really realize that there are some real consequences here. I think it is heading the right direction. There's also, and I think that's quite interesting, also on the consumer side more, that people are really starting to ask questions around, for instance, one of the things you hear a lot is carbon offsets. So particular large multinationals that you do business with in one way or another, particularly if you're a consumer, you'll see that you get a message, we've kind of we've offsetted your carbon emissions that you got through buying our products or services, and that makes you feel good. But have they really? And how do you know? So there's been a lot of research into that, and it turns out one of the largest providers, a lot of their credits were they call phantom credits. They weren't really real for all kind of reasons. So I think there's a lot more scrutiny, not just from legislators, but there's definitely that as well, but also from the general public. They're really asking the hard questions there. Both your perspectives, Nidhi, maybe your first. What do you see around greenwashing? Do you think it will still be a big issue in 24, or does everyone know what it is and can expect kind of the same thing going forward?
I think lawyers will have their handful. I think there's going to be a lot of continued legal cases around this and not being able to deliver on targets. And as folks get smarter about the information that's being outlined, particularly when we have comparability, I think it's going to continue to be a problem, especially on the climate side. I anticipate that there's going to be a lot of concerns in terms of how companies are going to be able to deliver on some of the targets. We've already seen in the energy sector, there have been several large cap companies that have pulled back on their investments. And I anticipate that's going to be a continued concern for shareholders. Someone mentioned in the chat green hushing. I was going to bring that up as well. Seth brought that up in his earlier points in the opening comments. Green hushing is something I've seen over the past year and a half. It's really picked up where companies don't want to put out targets because they're actually afraid that there's going to be accountability and they're going to be really looked at under a microscope in terms of what those targets are until they actually have a plan of action. So going back to, Tim, your earlier point on 2024 as year of implementation, I anticipate that companies will focus on putting an implementation plan in place, even if it's starting with the low-hanging fruit and being able to build up into what their targets are. So I hope that data proliferation will help support and move away from greenwashing. Technology is a double-edged sword, however. It helps us get data, but it also can be misleading in terms of how we're collecting information. So I think the biggest challenge that we're going to see going forward will be how technology is actually, unfortunately, probably creating a little bit of greenwashing where folks can hide behind reporting numbers, but they're going to have to do their homework to support their targets. So again, hoping that folks can use these tools as a way for doing credible work, being able to really acknowledge how to go from point A to point B, and that will help dissipate some of the greenwashing that we have been seeing.
Yeah, no, good points. Mike, your view on the greenwashing space, so to say.
Yeah, I spend way too much time thinking about greenwashing. A lot of it's out of self-preservation because one of my main jobs is to help companies communicate this stuff. So I want to know, especially with emerging rules, how can I advise my clients in a way that is both interesting but also compliant and will avoid trouble. And I think it's great that we have stronger legal definitions. Like as someone mentioned in the chat that the EU Parliament, actually I think it was yesterday, just voted to create stronger rules against greenwashing, which I actually think is awesome. It's been, I already used this term, it's been the Wild West for a long time, and the West is now being tamed in a good way. And I think a lot of companies, the reason why they greenwash isn't always out of malintent. A lot of times it's out of ignorance. And actually, I wrote an article about this, I think earlier this month, talking about how the origins of sustainability communication is actually really in crisis communication. Like it was the early days of there'd be a environmental disaster, and then the crisis comes, people would come in and try to make the company sound better and spin it some other way. So the history, and then beyond that, there was a lot of CSR communication around, look how great we are, like we're doing all these great things for the community. And so the history of sustainability communication is really around making companies look good and kind of downplaying the negatives. But the real way I think we're heading, and this has been happening for years, and I think now it's really going to be imperative, is that companies need to feel comfortable with telling their full story. And that means talking about all of the things that aren't great. Like, if you're not ready, if you're not meeting your goals, it's okay to talk about that and be honest about it and saying, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z to actually address these issues. And so this, people talk about transparency, and this has been a topic for many years. And I find with even companies I work with, I think it's a paradigm shift, because I think, I always say it's like the Mad Men era of marketing was really about making companies just talk about the great things they do and downplaying the bad things they do. And I think we're entering a new era, especially as kind of millennials and Gen Z rises. It's impossible to hide anything anymore. Like the truth gets out. So you're better off owning it and saying, hey, this is our journey. Here's where we are in our journey right now. We're not maybe where we want to be, but we're taking X, Y, and Z actions to get there. And that's also a more interesting story anyway, because nobody wants to hear a story about perfection. You want to hear about the struggle. And so I think it's an opportunity too for companies to say, hey, this is where we are. We've done materiality assessment. We've done a benchmarking to kind of understand where we are in our ecosystem and what needs to be done. We're not currently where we want to be, but here's what we're doing to get there. And that just creates so many opportunities for storytelling. But it also takes a lot of courage to your point, to maybe you'll get called out. There's a lot of groups out there that are going to criticize you for not doing enough, and you have to have the courage to stand on your ground. And I think that's what's led to this greenwashing kind of trend. Is there are actually a lot of companies that have done a lot of good work, and then they talk about it, and then they maybe get called out by NGOs or wherever, and that kind of turns them off from talking about it. So it's not like it's just companies haven't done anything and they're staying quiet because they haven't done anything. Some companies actually have done some great work. They go out there, they put themselves out there and speak authentically about it, and they still get backlash. And so it's going to be messy. Like it's never going to be perfect. But I think, I think we're going to, I don't know if we have time to talk about this anymore, but as long as you're aligning your sustainability strategy and communication with your values and you're focusing on material issues, at the end of the day, you're going to come out ahead, and just knowing what you stand for and not just saying things just because you want to get a few more likes on your LinkedIn posts.
And that cues me, Mike, that's awesome. Cues me for the next one. Like you're already talking there. And I think one of the key things is that trying to work out what do you stand for as a company. So, what is your point of view? And you said earlier, know when to speak out on particular issues and know when to, shut up basically or be quiet. And I think that is a real key thing that we see companies do well sometimes and do not so well. So 2 examples here. We don't have to go into them per se, but I think that, what you are flagging there is really important there, that, understand who you are as a business, understand your core values, understand your purpose, and be ready, have already decided there at the top that what is an important social issue that you stand for. You don't have to speak out about everything. So did you have anything else that, ties into this?
Is that directed at me?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a tough one. This is one that, I even feel kind of nervous even addressing given the current climate we're in. But I would say from a high level, I don't think companies need to address every single problem on this planet. Like, I don't, especially if they don't have a reason to talk. So, we saw this in 2020. Every company wanted to speak out against the murder of George Floyd for good reason. But what was happening?
Mike, I think we lost you.
Yeah, Mike, we lost your audio for a second. I think we still. No, we still lost your audio there. You can have a look at that, see if it comes back.
No.
No, not yet. So I'll just pick up there while Mike looks at his audio there, see if there's anything in the connection. So what we've seen is really companies starting to, feeling pressure by stakeholders at large to speak up about everything that's important, even though they might not have a viewpoint or standpoint on it. So I think it's really part and parcel of that sustainability journey at large. So really think about what is important to us and work that out prior, so that you have an action plan there.
And Tim, I would also add that, we spend a lot of time right now, especially with private and small cap companies, developing an ESG roadmap. So this ties exactly to the core values. So the ESG roadmap of how we build it's in a very methodical way. Like, we are looking at the aspirational goals tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or there might be other aspirational targets. And then building into that and looking at policies, processes, thinking about, the various governance that's being done to support some of these initiatives, and what else can be done to deliver on KPIs that might be measurable, year over year. So we try to do that in a very methodical way. This way, a company has credibility on the levers that it wants to support, and it's tying back to something that's more universal, like the UN SDGs as an example. And it's fine to start with just one or two high-level goals and then build into some of the other areas. You could start with climate and then build into the social side of things, and just think about it as an evolution versus saying we have to have everything outlined in year one when you roll out a CSR report. And that's something that we spend almost a year, 2 years sometimes doing with various private small cap companies.
I think that's a really good point, that it is an evolution. And for most companies, it's like, don't expect to be perfect on day one. Like, you have to go through the process. Mike, do we have your audio back?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yeah,
I guess my fancy microphone decided to stop working, so I'm just using my computer microphone now. But yeah, no, I agree. But I was trying to get at was basically that kind of what you guys are reiterating on is that, companies, I think it has to do with the fact that their comms team, their marketing team are not aligned with their sustainability team, or even a lot of times their C-suite. And so they see these opportunities, like, this is what you do when you work in PR. You're like, hey, we have moments in time and we want to align, we want to put out a statement about this and that, but they don't necessarily have a full strategy of like, do you really have the right to talk about racial inequality in America if your company is doing nothing to address it? Like, I personally think you don't. Like, you should focus on that first, and then you can talk about it. And I think, even when I'm doing a lot of these sustainability reports, that's DEI as a section. And, a lot of times companies don't have much to say there, or sometimes they do, it really depends. And so I think just knowing when to talk and when not to talk is important. But as far as like this Bud Light example, I mean, I think companies need to be willing, if they're gonna say something and do something, they need to stand their ground when they get pushback. Same thing happened, I think, with Target last year, where I think they were trying to remember the exact situation, but basically they it had to do with swimsuits. I think that were they were promoting swimsuits for people. I think it was for transgender folks, and it was they were getting a lot of criticism in their stores for this, and instead of really backing up their associates, they kind of I think they just pulled them from the shelves. So this isn't necessarily greenwashing specifically, but it's backtracking in a way where it's like, you should stand your ground. If you're going to stand for something, stand for it. And I think in today, especially in the US, there's so much you're going to make someone mad. We're in a very divided environment. I mean, it's only going to get more heated. So you need to decide, like, what are your values? what are you willing to stand behind? And yeah, you're going to make some people mad, but that's got to be okay with you. And I know it's easy for me to say if I'm, if I'm the CEO of a company and I lose half my customer base for some reason, then that might look bad on me. But at the end of the day, I mean, if I was in charge and I said, hey, we don't want those customers anyway, if they don't align with our values, which again, that's not how capitalism works, but it's how it should work. So, yeah, I think that there's gonna inevitably be more tragedies, more things that companies feel desire to talk about. And I think hopefully they've learned their lesson that, try not to just act and react to things, and have an actual plan and know when to talk and when not to talk.
Yeah, good points. Great, thanks for sharing that. We're getting close to time, so we're going to speed up a little bit here. And I think we already spoke about this to a degree, that we spoke about, that we're moving from that disclosure to seeing it as compliance to hopefully we're getting to a point, but that's the big question there, where companies really take ESG, sustainability as full kind of business integration, and really seeing it not as a compliance exercise, but as something that really creates value for the organization. A lot of the things we just spoke about tie into that. There's one thing I think that's really just worth another minute to focus on. I think this is more one of the emerging issues that we saw last year. AI. There's a rise of AI, but there's also a big risk around that, and a number around that are really having that board oversight there in terms of what is your company doing and what's society doing around AI. But it also goes directly back to your own business, understanding, are we using AI and how? And are we disclosing that? And we saw that the CEO of Sports Illustrated lost its job over it by using AI and not disclosing that. So there are some real kind of risks around that, calls for regulation. So I think this is more one of the accelerating and emerging areas. In one sentence, Nidhi, I'll start with you. Any thoughts on the potential risks around AI for companies at large?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is the rise in risk. The other thing I would say is cybersecurity, data privacy are, of course, big concerns coming out of generative AI and what the implications could be. And frankly speaking, the big question on the table is that with the higher computing power, we're going to see a greater energy footprint. But will AI help solve the climate crisis? So that will offset, the higher energy footprint that we're likely to see, given that AI is going to pick up. That's going to be the million-dollar question on how companies, as they continue down this road, they're going to be able to keep the emissions reduction despite investing in AI and seeing, what the implications could be. So I think the generative AI is going to be a very interesting theme here to stay. But definitely a lot more risk to think about as we are continuing to see applications across sectors.
Thanks, Mike. Mike, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, AI. This is one I can take a shot in the dark on it. I mean, I spent a lot of time reading about this and thinking about it. I like to believe that, and I've heard people use this as an example, that AI will just be a force multiplier. Apparently all the accountants were freaking out when Excel came out because they thought it was going to replace accountants, and it didn't. Same thing with calculators. We still need people to use the calculators. Where I'm a little concerned about AI is that this is a completely different technology where, if we get to the place where sci-fi says we might go, and it could replace humans completely at some point. And I think when ChatGPT emerged, I was surprised because I thought we were many years away from even that level of AI. And I don't know if you've all read Noah Harari's work, Sapiens, and a couple other books. Where he predicted this 10 years ago, that AI was going to be doing what it's doing now, and that it's eventually going to displace a lot of need for humans in work. And we're already seeing this in the tech sector with all these mass layoffs that are continuing to happen this year. Again, I hope that it's creative destruction and that new jobs are created. Maybe that will happen. And from an ESG standpoint, I do think AI is going to help be a force multiplier for companies, especially when if you're a solo person running sustainability at a company. AI could be a force multiplier and help you, manage your data, report, and run your programs. So I like to think that it's going to help, but I think it could go either way. And I'm just going to keep watching it and see how it goes.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of risk, definitely some opportunities as well. And I think that's the key message around AI. It's not all bad, hopefully. There's definitely some good things coming out of that. Then the final area there, and again, we'll be really short about this, is that we really see now with that not with all these topics, but in particular that wave of mandatory legislation, reporting, it's really becoming a thing that every company needs to do at some point in time. To your point, like accountants look for spreadsheets and other solutions. We've had the whole sustainability function, so to say, looking for solutions to make their life easier. A lot of them are using spreadsheets and just documents to just do their reporting, but it's pretty tedious. So we've seen this accelerating boom now, and if we have to believe Deloitte, but when we look at this image here, is that we're only at the start here of a massive ESG software boom where there's so many solutions and platforms out there in the market that companies will tap into. What will that really mean? And I think there's quite a few things we can talk about. For one, that companies really need to start to think to factor this into their budget. So, of course, Socialsuite is a software company, so we've kind of seen firsthand that there's rarely a company that actually has a budget line for that. They're all like, no, this is all ESG sustainability. We don't have any budget for that, not for software, not for anything really. This is new. So it's something that needs to be factored in, that there's a resource cost or there's a software cost to do this. The other thing is with that proliferation of the software is that I think due diligence on what you need. So your requirements from a regulation point of view, what should you be reporting? Your materiality assessment, what are the topics you should be reporting on? And how are you going to do the reporting? So what's your resourcing internally? What do you expect? Do those people to do the reporting, or do you outsource it? So really think before you jump into any software subscription. Is it what you need? Because there's so many solutions out there these days, in particular around carbon emissions. And I've seen companies go quite wrong there, where they got a very top of the market GHG emissions platform that did way too much, very feature rich, but they didn't have the capacity internally to actually run the $100,000 platform. So it's those things. I think on ESG software, your due diligence, understand what you're actually trying to achieve, and take it one step at a time. Any thoughts from either of you on where things might go with ESG software in the years to come?
Yeah, absolutely. I can kick that off. So essentially, from a software standpoint, I've really seen 4 buckets. Seen the data collection side, the KPI analysis, seen predictive modeling, which I anticipate will continue to skyrocket with AI applications, reporting, and communication. So really those 4 buckets. Reporting and communication feels very commoditized these days. I mean, there's so many software solutions out there. Frankly, low-hanging fruit to utilize that to improve efficiency for whether solopreneurs or even small corporates. Same with the data collection as well, just for getting the input for greenhouse gas footprinting as an example. The challenge is that there are 2 concerns. One is that with certain softwares where you're looking at greenhouse gas footprinting as an example, where there's a lot of inputs that are going into that, many of these softwares are black box solutions, and they don't always provide transparency around what goes into those calculations. So you get this carbon footprint, whether it's a product carbon footprint or a company one, you don't necessarily have an opportunity to vet out the methodology, think about the emission factors, and frankly, that could be very material. I can give you a quick example. We are working with a company where we're looking at steel, and the emission factors could really vary depending on the utilization of the steel, where it's coming from, et cetera. And we saw a great variance in those results. Also, in terms of input collection, if you're dealing with an international company, making sure that the currencies are being inputted correctly. This is the type of analysis that the technology providers don't necessarily do. So someone has to be very well versed in understanding the methodology, how all this is calculated, and make sure that it is audit proof and audit ready. So that does concern me for some of these solutions, that they don't all provide that. They have great user interfaces, but not necessarily transparency on exactly what the inputs are and how this is all being calculated. So we do vet that carefully. Second concern is everyone's selling the term AI. So just taking a step back, AI is built off of models and algorithms. It requires data points, a lot of them. And a lot of companies are selling AI solutions on predictive modeling, but they're looking at 2 or 3 test cases or a specific market. So I would say that any company that wants to utilize some of these technologies, they have to do their homework to understand the methodology, to understand where the data is coming from, how that is being calculated, and make sure that there actually is accuracy based on prior data points. That is my biggest concern. And hopefully corporates can use this as a tool, but they have to do their homework to figure out which solutions are doing it appropriately.
Spot on. Like that's, yeah, exactly. I think resonates really well with what I said. Due diligence, do your homework, make sure that you get the right tool for the right job. Mike, your thoughts? I think we've lost your audio again.
No, can't hear you.
Should we get you back? No, it's gone again. Well, no final thoughts for you for now. What we'll do is, just to keep moving while you look at that, I want to invite Seth back to the stage. We've seen there's already been quite a few questions in the chat today. I think Seth will probably have picked out a few that are relevant to go into, and the others will address by email. And I see that Mike has answered a few in the chat already, so that's great. Seth, back to you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. That was fantastic. Thanks all. So we're a little over our schedule, and so what we'll do is spend a few minutes on a couple questions. We're not going to get to all of them because of time. What we can do, if we don't get any questions, we could follow up after the webinar. So I'm going to start with a question from Denise. I think this is a great question. So Denise asked, related to sustainability return on investment, in terms of emerging trends, do you see sustainability leaders taking on even more commercial accountability? Tim or Nidhi, if you want to start with
I
the answer.
Seth.
Yeah.
I see this. This is where probably top 5 questions that we focus on for corporates. So commercial value creation is top of mind for companies, and they're looking at it in a couple of different levers. They're looking at it both from a corporate standpoint of what types of initiatives can we undertake, whether it's decarbonization or emission reduction types initiatives, and what is the financial impact and implication for that. So there's that element of in-house operational questions that they're addressing. But then bigger picture, they're also thinking about their customers. If you think about it, a lot of pressure that companies face right now on ESG sustainability is coming from customers. And so they have to address some of the opportunities, not only to be aligned from an ESG perspective, but also be able to see if there's potential value creation opportunities in being aligned with new customers, and in fact, maybe even increasing customer share of wallet in certain cases as well. We see this in the hospitality industry and consumer industry quite a bit. Food and retail, and there's a lot of opportunities for sustainability leaders to think about that commercial value creation from some of the products that they may have. It could be something sustainable brand, an organic brand, or it could be something that is in a different industry altogether, whereby we're looking at in a hospitality industry, it could be a product that's being sold to the Marriotts of the world. And so there's a lot of opportunity that we can think about from new product creation, and that's why the product carbon footprinting comes up. I know there's a question on that as well, Seth, so this kind of dovetails into that. But product carbon footprinting and just generally putting a label on products is becoming very important, because companies want to be able to put a sustainability label on and be able to quantify what that benefit is. And for those customers that actually do value, whether it's emission reduction or other sustainability goals, they want to work with the companies that are best aligned. So there is focus on that, and there's also increased focus on executive compensation. So sustainability leaders are being linked to some of these new initiatives, as well as corporate initiatives in addition to that.
Great response. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting time, because if it's a driver related to just compliance, and many companies, they look at it as a cost, and it falls into a cost bucket. But the companies that are more holistic and are thinking about it, not only compliance, but all these other areas of value, we're going to help with customer engagements, we're going to help with investors, even that ROI really comes to fruition. So it's a really interesting dynamic. Any other comments on that, or we'll go to the next? Mike, did we get your mic back?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry,
You're
I don't
back.
know what's going on with my technical problems over here. Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to that, other than I just think we also have to keep in mind that sometimes sustainability doesn't make business sense, and that's okay. Because it is a value driver, but sometimes it's not going to pencil out. And I think this is where a lot of companies, the focus has been really on how do we just generate alpha from this. It's not always going to happen, but you still need to do it, because the world still needs to go on. And I think as you have more consequences, especially with increased regulations, that's going to make this, it'll change the calculus, because if we get fined for not doing this, then maybe that will change the math. But consumers aren't always going to pay more for your sustainable brand. That's something that we've learned, I think, over the last 10 years in particular, that surveys will, in surveys, consumers say we'll pay more for sustainability. When they actually go to make their purchases, they don't always do that. So we need to think about, how can we create more value with sustainability at the same time? Sometimes it might be a cost center after all, but create value in other ways.
And yeah, I'd like to add to that, as a good point, Mike, that sometimes the return on investment is not alpha, it's for the greater good. So we might see that the world is less on fire in 50 years.
I think that's valuable personally as a Californian. Yeah.
But I think so it's the greater good. We do it for everyone. You might not see, an immediate short or long term, medium term return on that in your business, but in the long term, the risk landscape will change, and that will benefit you long term. But sometimes hard to really put numbers on that.
All right. So last question. I'm going to go to Mete's question here, who asks, interesting vibes coming out of the Davos World Economic Forum climate event. Is ESG being decoupled from environmental considerations? Are we back to E being environmental projects only? 10 seconds each because of time, and then we'll have to wrap up. So Mike, do you want to launch into that?
Well, this week I've been super slammed. I haven't actually followed what's happening in Davos yet, but so is the question, is ESG becoming just environmental?
Yes.
Maybe. I mean, I would say in the sense of most of the emerging regulations are going to be focused on the E, so I could see that being the priority, and S is really hard to measure, but S isn't going to go away. I think I wrote an article in Greenbiz a few years ago saying like 2020 was the year of the S, and because the E and the S are intertwined, you can't divorce them completely. So I think that companies they're going to be able to make the sell easier on the E, because even addressing water waste and even climate risk is less risky to many of them than addressing DEI challenges or other things like that. But I don't think that it's going to go away. I think they're going to have to continuously be considered together. So that's my take on that.
And Nidhi?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I think that we're leaning towards the E side. That being said, there's definitely been a lot more items on the agenda that I'm seeing that talks a little bit more about women equality, a little bit more about the women empowerment. So it is refreshing to see. That being said, coming out of COP28, the focus was just on, wow, we're actually seeing a transition away from fossil fuels. So I think the E topic is still on the table, and there's going to be a lot of focus on seeing, what's going to be done from a regulation standpoint. So I still anticipate that's an emphasis.
Perfect. Thank you.
Final one. No, not going to be decoupled. There is clearly a focus on climate, on environment, but that is because, and I think your point earlier, Nidhi, is that we all experience and see firsthand the physical impacts of climate change. So it's a lot easier for people to resonate, to see that we really need to do something there. So the world is kind of rallying behind climate, environment, but it's not going to be decoupled. It's one of the areas that we focus on first. And I think the EU is a good example. Everyone is, putting legislation out now on climate and environment, on GHG, but EU has already moved on. They got their CSRD, they got all these other things that are really important from a governance perspective, from a social perspective. So if the EU has been for a long time the front runner, I think they still are. I think they will be. And if we look at them and follow what they're doing, ESG will remain ESG, will focus on those three pillars. And yes, the world needs to catch up and do more on the S and the G as well.
Yeah, and Tim, I would also add that sometimes there's been a misnomer about thinking of these as separate pillars. They often are integrated. We've seen a lot of transparency on situations that have come up. For example, the production on solar components, majority of it being in China, but then it's utilization of forced labor. So folks are realizing that these topics are more intertwined, and the more cases that we're seeing out there forces people to think of it more holistically. And I hope that pushes everyone to think more from a strategy standpoint versus just getting caught up in, the various specific pillars as well.
Good point.
Perfect. All right. To wrap up, firstly, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nidhi, for joining us today. For the audience, if you want to reach out to Mike or Nidhi, they put their LinkedIn and their email addresses in the chat on the right. And then On the Socialsuite side, for myself and Tim, our contact information is on the left. If you have any questions whatsoever, we will be sending out and distributing today's webinar to everyone who joined us today. And we want to thank everybody again for joining. And thanks again to our panelists. This was great. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.